Hi, Tina Campbell, the New York Regional Partner of Master Networks. This is a lunch and learn with my friend Karl Dowden. He's going to talk to us today about what options are available to a commercial tenant in the times of this pandemic. I think this is very important and timely information. Some of our members and beyond have brick and mortar and actually need to figure out what to do as far as paying rent, things like that. So Karl, if you could give us a background of, why we're discussing this, who you are and what you do, and then we'll actually talk about that topic.
Absolutely. So I'm a real estate attorney that practices in Westchester County and in New York City. I'm also a member of the New York City chapter, the New York City Thursday Morning chapter as well. And the reason why I want to talk about it is because there are found to be a lot of tenants that were not allowed to operate in the space that they're leasing. And this could apply if they're a retail tenant and you're renting a storefront property, or if you're an office tenant and you're renting office space. The landlord will still likely expect you to pay rent. So this is designed to kind of give an idea of what your rights and possible remedies may be if, given the fact that this is a very unique situation.
And I'm sorry, you said that, so you're an attorney. Are you, you're local, right? I believe you're in White Plains?
Yes, so I live in Mount Vernon, and I have an office in White Plains and in New York City as well, like right across from Grand Central.
Great. And this is your forte, correct?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah. So when I started out as an attorney, I was working in-house at a property management company where I was drafting and negotiating leases for retail space and office space in the New York City metropolitan area for 2 years. I worked at a small law firm in Midtown for another 2 years, where I represented both landlords and tenants negotiating retail and office leases. And since I've been on my own, I've been doing the same thing, mostly on behalf of tenants.
That's great. Okay, so take us through what are the steps if somebody right now it just doesn't know what to do with, as they said, either they can't get in their space to do work, or they're just not getting paid. Let's say.
Right. So I would say the first thing you should do is check and see if you have business interruption insurance. If you do, you can always try to ask and see if they are willing to give you a payment as a result of the fact that you can't operate in the space. Realistically, it's unlikely that they will, because most insurance companies, if not all of them, carved out pandemics somewhat recently. I believe it was in 2004 with one of these scares back then. So in any event, that may not be your best avenue. In terms of what to do next, then it's important to look at your lease. There is what's known as a provision called force majeure, or it's also known as an inability to perform. If you're looking at a standard RABNY lease, REBNY lease, I believe it's in section 24, 26, where it talks about what happens if the parties are unable to act because of a war, an act of God, or something beyond a party's reasonable control.
Mm-hmm.
It's possible that there is a provision that might help you in that, in the force majeure clause. Otherwise, if not, you could also go down and look, and this is getting a little more creative, you could look to the casualty provision, the fire or casualty provision. A court may find that this was a casualty, or even more creatively, you could look to the condemnation or the eminent domain provision. Because of the restrictions implemented by the government, that could be viewed as a condemnation or a government taking for a temporary time. And there might be some remedies for you there. Other general contractual defenses that might be available are things like impossibility or frustration of purpose. These are all provisions that you could raise in the event that any litigation were to occur, but no one really knows how the litigation will play out. Litigation is inherently unpredictable. So especially given the fact that this is a novel thing, we haven't had a pandemic like this in probably 100 years easy, if not a little more than that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to say how judges will react, but the fact remains that there are those options if necessary. Practically speaking, one thing to consider, especially as a tenant, is that the court system is currently closed down except for essential cases. So essential cases involve things like illegal lockouts or HP actions, which is a proceeding that tenants can bring to force the landlord to make repairs, typically in a residential court context. But there's also a moratorium in place for any evictions that lasts until about the middle of June. So, all that by way of saying, even if a landlord can get you to court, once the courts open up, whenever that is, we don't really have a date or a time, like a date when that's going to happen as of right now. Even if a landlord can get you to court, the judge will probably be sympathetic anyway. In addition to the defenses that I just referenced before, the landlord could always risk the fact that the judge themselves can raise the defense on your behalf. And all that by way of saying, the landlords right now have a pretty strong incentive to negotiate. You certainly would as well. So the key is to make sure that you open up the line of communication if you need to. And there are certain ways that you can negotiate. You could
with your landlord,
ask,
you're talking about.
yes.
Open lines of communication with the landlord. Got it.
Absolutely. And I mean, there are certain things that you could do. You could try to negotiate to repay the rents that you can't pay over the time, like over the length of the rest of the lease term. You could ask for a partial abatement of the rent. You could ask for a total abatement of the rent. Realistically speaking, landlords probably will not want to do that. But some ideas might include like floating the idea of extending the term of the lease if you want to, in exchange for a few months of free rent. That might be a way where getting a total abatement of rent might be more palatable to the landlord. I mean, to be quite frank, if you put yourself in the landlord's position right now, even if you gave them the keys to the space today, would they really want to be in a position where they have to release the space? I mean, I imagine that there are not going to be that many tenants that are going to be banging down doors trying to open up a space right now or in the next couple of months, just because of the uncertainty of how things will last. We don't know how long the shutdown will continue. We don't know if there'll be a second shutdown or a second pause. So all of these things are going to make it harder for a landlord to rent the space. So just keep that in mind when you're negotiating with them. They certainly do want to have you pay as much rent as you can afford, but they also don't want to lose you or they shouldn't want to lose you because of the risk of what happens after you leave.
Right. If you've been a good tenant. I mean, that's also
Yes.
has to go into this. If you haven't paid your rent before, they may use this as an opportunity, right?
Right. And I mean, that's sort of, and that is a tack that a lot of landlords will take. It's like, were you a good tenant before? Is this a temporary thing? Or is this something where they don't think that you're going to survive in the longer term? Because that's going to guide how they act. If you could portray your request as this is a temporary thing for my business, I believe that I can recover as soon as things start to normalize. That will make it much easier for a landlord to negotiate and give you terms that are favorable, because again, they want you to pay the rent for a long time. And even if they wanted to put pressure on you, there's only so much pressure they can put because they can't bring you to court at this time.
Right. No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I mean, so you were talking about, opening up the lines of communication. If they don't want to talk to you, your landlord does not want to open up those lines of communication. It's just like, hey, just pay it. What do you think then? That's when you go to your contract?
Yeah, that's when I would say you start talking to an attorney a little more seriously about what sort of defenses you have, because it would appear that the landlord has made a decision and they are going to want to, then they'll try to evict you as soon as the courts reopen. So you want to try to position yourself in the best way possible to defend yourself. And if you want to stay for a long time, you should be in a position where you're trying to save as much money as you can to offer to pay rent as and when negotiations for settling the case comes up. If you can show that you want to stay and that you're paying what you can and you're willing to pay what you can, well, let me rephrase that. If you want to stay and you're saving your money and you're making an offer that shows that you want to stay, you're willing to pay what you can afford, then I believe that a court would they'll look at they'll look kindly on it. And if the landlord wants to push to evict them, and there are hundreds of other cases, or more realistically, thousands of other cases, chances are the judge isn't going to be any rush to hear the landlord's case.
Right.
They might get pushed back to give you a little more time and to give the landlord a little more incentive to say, hey, maybe I should take the tenant up on this offer. There might be some strategic value in not paying that immediately, like as you can. So that's why I would say definitely speak to an attorney, get an idea, or give them an idea of what your exact situation is, so that they can formulate the best strategy to try to keep you in the space.
I mean, one of the things that we had talked about was to make sure that, so let's say that the landlord does come back to you and say, okay, I agree, let's do this. And then they want to write it into a new, like an addendum or whatever you call it on a lease. I mean, that you're saying, and you had said to me, like, be careful of that, correct?
Yes. So, I mean, without trying to go too deep into the weeds, whenever you have a document that the landlord wants you to sign, it's always a good idea to have an attorney look it over. And even if it looks like a simple one-page document, there are going to be things in it that may have implications for you down the road. Like a typical example is any sort of waiver or certification that the landlord is not in default. If that isn't true, that one sentence could bite you down the road if there was some sort of ongoing dispute about the status of a repair that you believe that the landlord should have made, but the landlord never did. So if you make that certification or representation that the landlord is not in default, or that you waive all of your any claims that you have against the landlord in consideration or in exchange for whatever concession the landlord gave, then you might be giving up a battle that you did not mean to give up. So that's always that's like the strongest example that I like to use to explain why it's worth bringing an attorney, even though it looks like a straightforward document.
Yeah, got
One
it.
sentence can change your rights.
Absolutely. And you may not know that if it's a legalese type of thing.
Right.
So, I mean, one of the things was that that sounds like to me, and I think this is probably the best advice is right, is not to stick your head in the sand right now
Right.
and
I
not
mean,
speak to somebody.
right, because if you don't reach out to the landlord and you just stop paying your rent, the landlord's not going to know what's going on. If you don't respond to them and they reach out, they're going to assume that you either vacated or you should close down the business. And at that point, they really don't have any options other than to start an action. If that's even what, if assuming that that's the case, assuming that you have vacated, and then they'll start an action. And if that's something that you want to avoid, having that open line of communication will be helpful. Also, most landlords will probably make an offer, and it may not be an offer that you like, but they'll at least give you an offer for
Yeah.
some sort of discount. And depending on how long you've been in business,
Yeah.
90% of the times landlords hate to give any sort of rent abatement. So the fact that they're doing it during this time shows how willing they are to try to keep you. So if there's anything that can be done to make your business work for the long term, ask for it, because if the landlord says no, at least you have some certainty about what you can do next. And if the landlord says yes, then you have some, then you have some certainty, which is even better news, because then you don't have to worry as much. I mean,
Right. And I think some people don't realize that there's some action that can be taken, and where they need to really go get representation from an attorney. And how does it work? Like, what would they do if they hear this and they say, okay, I really need to talk to Karl Dowden? Like, what do they do? Do they just contact you? Like, we'll have all your information in, below in this video, but how does that work? Do you give them a certain amount of time to discuss what their issue is? How does that work? They
yeah.
call you?
Yeah, so typically they can reach out to me by phone or by email. I'm available in either way. And ideally, if you have your lease documents handy, then I'll go over the facts with you over a phone call. If you're in a position where you can send me the lease documents ahead of time, that would make the consultation a lot faster and a lot more effective. And we can kind of discuss what you want to do. Some people want to stay, some people want to leave, and then there are different strategies involved for each idea.
Mhm.
And it's a lot of it's kind of on a case by case basis and
Right.
just based on what how cooperative the landlord may be and what exactly the tenant wants to do at the end of the day.
Right, because I mean, we really need to give a disclaimer here that this is all based on just, this conversation. It's a really case by case basis. You're not giving any advice that is just other than being general, and that it really has to be looked at. Anything that you've said really has to be looked at and digested, as to what the leases and the circumstances are.
Right, exactly.
Mhm. All right, cool. So I just, you know what, I really thank you so much because I think that this is something that there's a lot of people out there worrying about, businesses, and they don't know where to go. One of the things, just a testimonial for you, Carl, is that, part of Master Networks is we hear testimonials and we hear about people working with each other. And I hear really good things about people are saying about you and about your work. And then you're just a very nice, kind person. And I just really want to say thank you for spending the time with me today to discuss this. And I hope that people will reach out to you. I really do.
Yes. Yes, and I'm happy to help in any way I can, especially in these times. And of course, I appreciate hearing about the kind words that people say about me.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I mean, that's the benefit of what we're able to have the community of Master Networks people, of course. So we'll put the information that people can get in contact with you. That will be part of the notes of this lunch and learn. But appreciate it so much. Thank you for your time. I know you're very busy right now, but it's super appreciated for all of our members and beyond.
No, it's my pleasure.
Thank you, Carl.